Good evening on this Thursday. I hope that everybody has had a great week and you've been able to accomplish pretty much everything that you had hoped to accomplish. So, I titled this video Puzzles. Now you're probably wondering, well, what do puzzles have to do with anything? Well, as we prepare to head to the fields here within the next probably 75 days, maybe 90, a lot of the puzzle pieces are getting put in place or already pretty well put in place for this year's growing season. Dwayne, awesome to have you on as always. It's greatly appreciated. I mean, most of us last fall, if we were going to take soil tests, of course, started with that main puzzle piece. So we got our results. But did we look at the soil tests? Did we interpret them? Did we ask questions about what the best approach was with the products we were using and what we were trying to accomplish going forward? Or did we just give in to the person that took the soil test and selling us the product and took their word for it and just wrote them a check? So that's the first puzzle piece we should be looking at and asking questions. I received a partial soil test this week, and the gentleman asked me, hey, can you give me a recommendation? Well, I was missing half the information, and you can't really put a puzzle together when you only have half the pieces. Or it's a lot more difficult anyway, let's put it that way. Malcolm, great to have you on as always. So once we look at that soil test and we analyze it, we figure out the right products that are going to get us to our yield goals, then we have to look at, okay, how else do we approach this? What's our nitrogen rate going to be used? How are we going to manage our nitrogen? Are we going to put fall anhydrous on, which in my opinion is only about as half efficient as the other nitrogen sources? And yes, I know there are exceptions. I've worked with a couple growers where that was true. But are we going to be using a nitrogen stabilizer? Are we going to do some side dressing? Are we going to do some late season nitrogen with either Y drops or maybe a plain putting it on there right before VT? All things we have to consider. And if we haven't considered them, are we asking, does that fit our management? Does that fit our idea of what our ideal crop looks like? The next piece is, what micronutrients are we using? And when should they be applied? Of course, that goes back to getting a full, complete soil test. So at least we have a little bit of a roadmap and the main puzzle piece put in place, and we can start getting the peripheral pieces put in their right places. We have to figure out what our chemical program is. Are we going to just utilize a pre-emerge program? Are we going with a 2-pass? Are we going to put some fungicide on late? And Beck's has some PFR proven when the ideal time is to put on fungicide. Good evening, Britt. Awesome to have you on. Now, tillage, most people know what kind of tillage, and they've already implemented that into their program on a regular basis. I mean, there's guys that have been no-till for decades. A lot of guys do strip till, and they've kind of perfected their program as far as doing the strip till. So most of that tillage idea is pretty well in the puzzle already. The next thing is, what kind of adjuvants do we need to use with our chemical program? Do we need to use a drift retardant? Because I know here in Southwest Iowa, the wind blows pretty much all the time. So it would be a good idea to include that. Do we need an AMS product? Ammonium sulfate. Do we need a pH adjuster so that the chemicals don't get in their half-life and we lose all our efficiency and our efficacy in what we're trying to do? And of course, the big puzzle piece is our seed. What kind of seed are we going to be planting? Who are we going to be planting from? Are we going to try some different hybrids from different companies? Which I would strongly encourage everybody to plant at least 2 or 3 different companies, just to give a good comparison and give it a fair comparison. Next thing is, what kind of seed treatments are we going to have? Are we going to put something on for a fungicide? Are we going to use something like an Amplified D, which gives you extra energy into your corn, cotton, alfalfa, small grain seeds? Are we going to use an inoculant on our soybean seeds, our canola? The next thing we have to worry about is, are we going to do some tissue testing so we can know what we have to foliar feed? And when are we going to foliar feed? Now, to me, the second big puzzle piece that we really have to put in place is the education component. Because the education component can tell us when to foliar feed, what questions we need to ask, and what products we need to look at for our fertility program, our nitrogen management. Because if we don't know how to ask these questions, if we don't know how to evaluate products and ask why we need to use this product versus this one, what's the efficiency, then we're at the mercy of whoever's trying to sell us something and get that check from you. Now, the other one, which is probably what most would consider upper management or higher management product, is your PGRs. Now, I know Conklin has one that my guys have used on soybeans plenty of times. And we averaged just a little under 5 bushel putting it on with their fungicide. But those guys are doing a lot of the right things up front. They're using in-furrow fertilizer with the correct micronutrients according to the soil test. They're watching their nitrogen management. They're putting a solid chemical program out there so that they don't have that weed pressure and those weeds stealing nutrients and water from their crop. So we have all these puzzle pieces, but what does it look like for your management, for your farm, for each field? Because ideally we can't, not even ideally, realistically we can't make each field the same. We can't treat each field the same, because each one is going to require something maybe even just a little different, depending on if you put manure on and how long you've been putting manure on, whether it's hog manure or cattle manure or poultry litter. All these pieces, folks, are parts of your puzzle. And if you aren't proactive, if you aren't taking the bull by the horns and implementing some higher management practices, and I know I beat this horse, you're settling for average, you're settling for the status quo, and you are at the mercy of people that are just taking your money and really realistically not giving you the best advice. I picked up a grower 2 years ago that we started working together, and the advice he was given was terrible. It was costing him money every year. I mean, he was making enough to pay the bills, but he wasn't reaching the genetic potential of what he was putting in the ground. And we know that everything we do is just trying to stop the yield reduction. Because ideally, if we did everything right, we'd all be raising 600, 700, 800 bushel corn. We'd all be raising at least 200 bushel beans. We'd all be raising at least 300 bushel wheat. But a lot of guys are struggling to raise 180 bushel, 200 bushel corn. They're struggling to raise 60, 70 bushel beans on a regular basis. Why? What is missing out of your puzzle? What is missing in your management? Just something to think about on this cool evening. At least here in southwest Iowa, it was a little chilly today. Now, I don't want to leave the livestock people out of the equation either, because they got their own set of puzzle pieces. Now, if you have both crops and livestock, then you have a big mess. But no, if you're in a livestock, you got a lot of genetic decisions to make as far as your bulls and your cows. You have your pasture management, you have your timber management, you have your water management. How does that all look? I would encourage you to go to a Better Way to Farms podcast and listen to Dr. Mulvaney talking about dry potassium and the amount of chloride that you are going to be putting on that field, on that pasture, on that hay ground, and realize there's better options. Because realistically, it's our duty, obligation, and responsibility to take care of those animals in our care. And we can only do that if we up our management game. Or we can only properly express their full genetic potential if we up our management game. And don't forget about the facilities for you livestock folk either. You might as well upgrade your facilities if at all possible instead of buying that new pickup. You might as well upgrade your facilities instead of redoing the house. Unless, of course, you got leaky windows and leaky doors, then that's probably a better idea. But, so, let's figure out your puzzle. Give me a call at 515-822-7095. Love to talk to you, discuss how your puzzle's looking, what pieces are missing from your puzzle. And if you happen to be going to the Iowa Power Show, stop by our booth outside the main ballroom, booth number 725, I think it is, or 752. Anyway, give me a call or a text at 515-822-7095, and I will definitely get you the right number for that booth. But we are outside the ballroom on the upper level. Love to see you there in Des Moines next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. And everybody have a great Thursday night, and we'll see you tomorrow night.